Hello, third graders. Welcome back. We are continuing on with our geometry unit today. So we are going to be moving away from our quadrilaterals and moving on to different figures with different amounts of sides. So if you don't have these items already, you're going to want a pencil, piece of paper, and your geometry packet. So pause the video and go grab those things. All right, welcome back. So today, starting with our I can statement, we can describe a pentagon, a hexagon, and an octagon with its properties. We're going to be talking about 3 different shapes today. So let's get started. We're first going to start talking about the pentagon. So this should look pretty familiar to you by now. We're going to be talking about the properties that a pentagon has again. So a pentagon is a 5-sided figure. So remember, a quadrilateral was a 4-sided figure. Pentagon is 5-sided, so it's a 1 extra side. So all 3 of these shapes are different kinds of pentagons. Not all pentagons look exactly the same. And then this picture right here is actually a huge structure in the United States. This is called the Pentagon. It's in Washington, D.C., and it's a big, important part of our government. So let's look at the properties that a pentagon has. I'm going to grab my pen here. I'll go through this one with you guys, and then the next 2 you're going to practice on your own. So how many vertices does it have? Well, this is going to be the same on every single pentagon. It's always going to have the same amount of vertices. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Should we see if it's the same on these 2 figures? See, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then let's look at this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can say that a pentagon always has 5 vertices. Now let's look at these perpendicular lines. Remember what we're looking for with a perpendicular line? So we're looking for that right angle. So this is not going to be the same with every single pentagon. Can you figure out which one of these 3 shapes has perpendicular lines? Pause the video if you need a second. Right, this purple figure here has perpendicular lines. So if we look, we can see that right here, we can make a right angle. So we have perpendicular lines right here, but these 2 figures do not have perpendicular lines. This one right here looks like it could almost be a right angle, but it is a little too big to be a right angle. So notice if I try to make my square here, it is not a perfect square. This line is a little bit slanted there. All right, let's look at parallel lines. Do any of these figures have parallel lines? Again, not every pentagon is going to be the same with these parallel lines. Not all of them are going to have them. So which figure here has parallel lines? So again, this purple figure has a set of parallel lines. This line right here is parallel with this one. But these 2 figures has no sets of parallel lines. So all of these lines will touch if they continue on at some point. Whereas these ones are parallel, they will never ever touch. All right, how many angles? Well, angles is going to be another thing on the pentagon that is always going to be the same. So let's look at our angles here. Just finish erasing this. All right. So looking at this figure first here, I can see we have 1 angle right there, 1 angle right here, so 2, 3, 4, and I know this doesn't look like an angle, but remember an angle is where 2 lines meet. So this actually is an angle. It's just a really, 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 really big angle. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do these 2 shapes have 5 angles too? Take a second to look at that. So they do both have 5 angles. You see me drawing them in right here. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So pentagons have 5 angles. How about sides? This is something that I mentioned earlier. Do you remember how many sides a pentagon will always have? So pentagon is always going to have 5 sides. So pentagons always have 5 angles and 5 sides. That's what makes it a pentagon. What about right angles? Do you remember if we saw any right angles here when we were looking for those perpendicular lines? So these two figures here have no right angles, but this figure does have 2 right angles. There's one right here and one also on this side. So if we're talking about the properties of a pentagon, we can say that a pentagon is always going to have 5 vertices. It can sometimes have perpendicular lines, depending on the shape. It's not always going to have perpendicular lines, but it can. Along with parallel lines, it can sometimes have parallel lines depending on the shape, but it will not always have parallel lines. It depends on what figure you're looking at. But a pentagon will always have 5 angles and 5 sides. And then again, it can have right angles, but it does not always have to have right angles in order to be a pentagon. Pentagon is interesting in which it doesn't have to have a right angle to be qualified as one. It only needs to have 5 sides and 5 angles. All right, let's move on to the hexagon. So the hexagon is a 6-sided figure. So every single hexagon is going to have 6 sides. This is probably a familiar shape to you. And we see hexagons quite often, and they always look like this. So I want you to pause the video for a moment, and I want you to notice how many vertices does it have? Does it have perpendicular lines, parallel lines? Does it have angles, and how many? How many sides does it have, and how many right angles? So take a second, pause the video, write your answers down, and then come back. All right, friends, so if we're looking at the hexagon, I can see that it has 6 vertices. 1, 2, sorry, it's a bad dot. 3, 4, 5, and 6. It has 6 vertices. It does not have any perpendicular lines. You should have said no here. No perpendicular lines. There are no right angles anywhere on the shape, which would create a perpendicular line. It does have parallel lines. It actually has 3. This is a little bit tricky here. So if you look right here, this side is parallel with what side? If you said this side, you are correct. So these 2 lines are parallel. Do you see any other parallel lines on the shape? There are, in fact, more parallel lines. So if you look right here, this side is parallel with what side? With this side. And then this side here is going to be parallel with that side. So it actually has 3 sets of parallel sides. Did you get that one right? All right, how many angles did you write down? How many angles does the hexagon have? So a hexagon is going to have 6 angles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. How many sides does it have? Well, it's a hexagon, so we know it's going to have 6 sides. So a hexagon has 6 sides and 6 angles. And then how many right angles? We kind of already talked about this one. It's going to have no right angles. There's no right angles on the hexagon. So what kind of properties does a hexagon have? Well, it has 6 vertices every single time. It does not have any perpendicular lines. It does have 3 sets of parallel sides. It has 6 angles, 6 sides, and 0 right angles. Give yourself a pat on the back if you tried your hardest on that. All right, last one for today. We are going to be talking about the octagon. Now, I know you've seen this shape before. The stop sign is an octagon. So what do you think an octagon is? Octagon is an 8-sided figure. So an octagon is always going to have 8 sides. It always looks like this. So I want you to pause the video again and notice what properties does it have? How many vertices? Does it have perpendicular lines? And go through all of these vocabulary again and write down your answers. And come back when you're done. All right, so an octagon has how many vertices? If you said 8, you are correct. We have, get my pen out, 1 right here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 vertices. Does it have any perpendicular lines? Does not have any. See, there's no right angles on this shape, therefore there will be no perpendicular lines. Does it have parallel lines? Again, this is kind of like the hexagon where it does have parallel lines on the opposite sides. So this side is parallel with this side, so we have one set of parallel lines. This side is parallel with this side. This one is parallel with this side, and this side is parallel with this side. So kind of like the hexagon here, we're going to have, instead of 3, but 4 sets of parallel lines. There's a lot of parallel lines in the octagon. How many angles did you see in this shape? So just like the number of sides, we have 8 angles in the octagon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 angles. And then how many sides? Well, we know an octagon has to have 8 sides. That's what makes it an octagon. So there's going to be 8. And then do you see any right angles in this shape? You should have said no to this answer, to this question. It has no right angles. So what kind of properties does an octagon have? You can say this with me if you'd like. It's going to have 8 vertices. It's going to have no perpendicular sides. It's going to have 4 sets of parallel sides. It's going to have 8 angles. It's going to have 8 sides, and it's going to have no right angles. You guys are masters of shapes now. All right, grab your geometry packet and flip to this page. You can pause the video if you need to. So we're going to write down our vocabulary we learned today. So we learned about the figure, a pentagon. Draw your own pentagon here. Remember, it can look a variety of different ways. Pentagons do not always look the same. And the number of sides, well, it's always going to have 5 sides. Remember that. And it's always going to have 5 angles. And it's always going to have 5 vertices. When you're done with that, write the figure hexagon. You can draw a picture here. It's always going to look the same. It's a 6-sided figure. Number of sides is going to be 6. Number of angles is 6. And then the number of vertices is 6. And then lastly, we have the octagon. And the octagon is the 8-sided figure. This is our stop signs. Number of sides is 8. Angles is 8. And vertices is 8. Pause the video if you need to catch up on those vocabulary, and then move on with me to our homework. So for your independent work today, oh, sorry about that. Get us back to normal here. We are going to be working on page 302 in our math book. So 302 is called Name Polygons. So we are going to be naming our polygons according to how many sides they have. So you're going to name each figure here. Look back to your geometry packet, your vocabulary, if you need to. You have seen all of these figures, so you're just going to be counting the numbers of sides, and then you are going to be naming them. And after that, you are going to just move on to your IXL activity, and then you are done for the day. You guys have a great weekend, and thank you for watching with me.